And we'll officially get started. Welcome everybody to this Groundwork Lunch and Learn on Indigenous food cultures. My name is Christina Barkle. I'm the food equity specialist at Groundwork. And as a member of the food and farming team, I'm super pumped for today's session based all about food. And we have been putting this together in partnership with Michelle Schulte, who's a program director at the Intertribal Council of Michigan and a advisory council member here at Groundwork. So I'll turn it over to her to introduce our panelists and kind of outline the structure of this lunch and learn. So thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, Abojul Kinawia, Ozawajinka is also what I'm called. I'm Ozawajinka, which is yellow pine. And, I just kind of want to set the tone for why we're here and what's happening. So we have 3 guest panelists today, and we're going to allow time for each of them to introduce themselves. And then after that, several of you have forwarded some questions to us that we can dig a little deeper into the work that they're doing. And also thinking through some of the other presenters that we've talked to. You've learned a lot about history, Anishinaabe history, about, some of our treaty rights, our governance. And so, this is giving us another angle, another way that the Anishinaabe people are still surviving and thriving today, and how we can better, build relationships across cultures and communities. Joe VanAlstine is the director of food distribution for his community. We also call him the FDIPR programs, if you're familiar. He's been really instrumental in working with the USDA, both directly and indirectly, to improve the way that a lot of our food distribution programs and commodity programs work, and making them more client choice, and also the inclusion of indigenous traditional foods into those food distribution programs. He's also, I think, he used to be, I don't know if you still are, Joe, but the chairman of his farm board. And so I'll let him, when it's his turn, to talk a little bit more about that. And then Marty Reinhart, I should say, Dr. Marty Reinhart is a professor at Northern Michigan University. He's worked under the Center for Native American Studies and used to be the director of that program, I believe. And he's also a principal researcher on a program called the Decolonizing Diet, and has done a lot of work there and traveled all over the world talking about those kinds of things. And he's one of the few people that I know that have read every single treaty that's ever made with the US government. So he definitely can, elaborate a little bit more on that and how that relates to our topics today. And then Dr. James DeDecker is also an employee of MSU, and he's the director of the Upper Peninsula Research and Extension Center, and he specializes in community food systems, sustainable agricultural, soil health, fertility, integrated pest management, human dimensions of agriculture. And he has been a great advocate and partner with the tribal communities, especially in the Upper Peninsula. And so, his perspective as a non-native person is, really valuable in that, we can build these solid relationships, we can work together, and we do have a lot of wisdom that we can share across lines. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. Just for the sake of being flexible and open, is there any of you 3 that would like to start first? Okay, nobody's jumping
Just
in there.
Just to get the ball
Joe,
rolling, I'm going to volunteer Joe.
Oh, go ahead, Marty.
Oh, I was going to volunteer Marty. Come on.
I was going to volunteer Marty.
Oh, that's 2 votes for Marty.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, Marty, you're
I
first.
can get started.
He's the
Buju.
elder in the group, so.
Oh no. Buju. Wabanang me shake yak yak dishnakas. Bawating don jaba. Kitchen the mebene Ziibimijwang dading. Jajak and dodam and the shnabe ojibwenda ao. My traditional name, Wabanang me shake yak yak. Essentially, it's a hawk coming down out of the eastern sky. My family is on both sides of the US-Canadian border. I have family who's Ziibimijwang, Garden River First Nation, Ontario, and family who are part of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians on this side, which I'm also enrolled citizen in this tribe on this side. And my wife is also Anishinaabe. She's from St. Ignace. She grew up in that area. She's a Turtle Clan, and so our daughters are, also Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and very proud of them. They both. One daughter just got done with her master's, and the other daughter is almost done with her master's in nursing. So, pretty cool. I grew up mostly over at Sault Ste. Marie. I was part of a construction family in and out of Michigan with, last one in Michigan shut the lights out in the 1970s. And so, we went down to Texas and then just been coming back. Sault Ste. Marie or Bawating has always been a hub of our families. When we go out, we always come back. Served in the military for a while, been around the world. I work at Northern Michigan University now and have been for a long time, teaching Native American studies and, working on a number of issues. My favorite areas to focus on, as Michelle alluded to, is Indian education, thinking about how do we or don't we see Indian people in our education systems, focusing on treaties and relationships between tribes, federal government, state governments, and even other tribes. And then, most recently, since around 2010, my interest in Indian education led me into education about food and how do we approach the idea of decolonizing our diets. So we had the Decolonizing Diet project that we implemented at Northern Michigan University. We had 25 research subjects who joined together on a year-long journey looking at Indigenous foods, relations in the Great Lakes region, committed ourselves to eating Indigenous foods on a daily basis for a year. I ate 100% Indigenous foods for 1 year, and it transformed my body and my life. And it was really, really good to have that relationship building between myself and those spirit beings that we think of as food. We think of them as food, but they're other spirit beings. And we had some significant outcomes from that study. That study's been featured in medical journals now and colleges of medicine, and got a couple of publications out there, but significant results included positive weight loss, people getting into the weight categories they should be in just from eating Indigenous foods. Also a significant decrease in bad cholesterol. And so when you think about it, the three primary killers of Indigenous people, heart disease, obesity, and diabetes, we address those things through the diet project. And that's really important, So we also had some noteworthy outcomes for blood glucose levels and blood pressure, which is also impacts our communities disproportionately. I think more than that, though, we walked away from the project, and I say walked away, we're still doing a lot of it, 10 years later. It's taken on a life of its own, really. And in some ways, I hope it's inspired other projects. I think it, we see it as far away as Australia. Aboriginal Australian communities have adopted a similar projects for their communities. But, we have these cultural teachings that we became more focused on as a result of committing ourselves to eating Indigenous foods on a daily basis. It required us to think about how we interact with food. A lot of us are familiar with going to the marketplace, or gardening. I'm blessed, I have the opportunity to be a forager, a hunter, a fisher, a gardener, a gatherer, and a person that goes to the marketplace. And so to me, it's more comprehensive to think about food access, how we access our food or not, and how we are educated about it or not. Those are the two primary factors, I think, that impact our relationship with food, our education about it and our access to it. And of course, there's always the resources we have to work with, but I think that could fall under access. And then, I think it's really important that we consider how we are able to access food. So our abilities. Oftentimes, we think of those as access issues, But there are elders who have that knowledge about food, and they're willing to share it, and they're willing to help us learn, help us, get out there and do these things. But they themselves can't get out there and do it anymore. As someone who suffers from arthritis in my joints, and it affects me different times of the year, worse than others, I'm starting to realize what that means. So when Joe kids around with me about being the elder of the group, I'm an elder in training. I still feel like I'm part of that Western door, that middle-ager group, but my body's saying, hey, Marty, you're getting old. You got to slow down and start, handing some of these things off to younger people that are more able to do these things. So I'm starting to think about how our elders sit around those fires, and how they have to come into their elderhood and realize that we can't do everything we used to do. It's hard for me now to go out backpacking and climbing mountains and crossing these rivers that are strong currents and stuff. So I think about all those things in relationship to our food dynamics, and it's important that we find these opportunities to share our knowledge in the best way possible, and still do what we can. But it's also important that we don't put too much weight on our own shoulders. We cannot decolonize overnight. We cannot expect, that everyone is going to have the same ability to do what everyone else can do. So we have to be easy on ourselves, easier on ourselves sometimes, rather than taking all that weight on our shoulders. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over is, we've had too much shame. Shame has been leveled on Indian country, through colonization. They've tried to make us ashamed of who we are. We've had so much shame in our lives for multiple generations. We don't need any more of it. What we need is positive, bright futures to look forward to. And I think the food is a natural unifier. It's a natural healer if we do it in the right way. So that's all I'm going to say for now. Miigwech.
Oh, miigwech, Marty. All right, Joe, would you like to go next? I know that I've left out a lot there in your introduction, so if you wouldn't mind being the next one, and then we'll come back around for questions for everybody and get into a little bit deeper of the questions that people have sent.
So, Ani Buju, zo Ziibimijwang cause, Waganaxing Odawa and Dao, Jamaganash and Dao, Jijak and Dodum. So, I mean, we could keep on going with that a little bit, but my English name is Joe. I am from the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, Crane Clan as well, and also like Marty, I'm a veteran as well. So I've also been around the world. I was in the Navy, so just kind of think back about what Marty has said about who we are. I think for me personally, being Jijak Dodum, just like he is, here we are, the Jijak Dodums out speaking, to the communities and to the members at large, so I feel that's a real honor to our clans and our clan systems that we do this, and this is how it come to be, and it also brings back to me with, being Odawa as well. We are the keepers of the trade. And so for the work that I do here, again, is something that is very close to me and connected to me. And so doing this work is, I know that it's the exact same work my ancestors did. And so with that, I feel a great responsibility to continue it, and be there for the upcoming generations as well to do this. So, so miigwech to, Dr. Marty there for speaking first, and miigwech to James being on here as well. Looking at this screen, I see all this interconnectedness as well, of, people I've worked with, people I, it's just amazing to see how interconnected we all are as well on the screen. So, but I'm the food distribution program director for the tribe here. I've been in that position for 12 years now. Our past executive director, Al Colby Ba, came to me one day and he said, "Joe, you're our food guy." And I said, "Okay, I'm a welder by trade, so food, I just like it." But I said, "Okay," and so that's how it started out. I was just going to, the local food alliance meeting and just getting involved and going to some conferences through the food distribution program, and reading Marty's Decolonizing diet book, and that blew me away. And I was like, this is what we need to be doing. Like, and why aren't we doing this? And so, I really appreciated reading that and, going through the website and looking at all the food and thinking like, we need to have more places like this where people can come buy duck eggs and stuff like that. So it really helped light a fire under me and the work that I do here as well. So again, Ziibimijwang for that as well, So, but the thing I've learned in FDPIR is we can't always just force people to do exactly what we want, in great big huge numbers, right? Because they're not going to listen to us. So when we looked at the food distribution program, we know salt's it's good and bad, but a lot of the things were salty. So when we started taking salt out of the food here in the food distribution program, it was like a revolt. Like, oh my God, this is so like nasty and plain and blah. I'm like, well, you can add it yourself. We're just not going to put it in there for you, right? And so, but we had to like wean everybody off, in the canned foods that we give here, and so that was, a slow process that we're still working it out, so people can add it to themselves. But then traditional foods was another thing that we really wanted, and it's not a battle that I picked up and said, I carried that battle on for those who came before me and who wanted it in this program. And so, our first traditional food was bison. The next traditional food was the Minoman. And, that was such a long fight to get that food into the food package. Now bison is a regular part of the food package, but Minoman is not. It's still a bonus item. There's a lot of issues that go along with Minoman because we got to create the actual, the specification for it. We got to tell them this is what it is. It's not what you think it is, the USDA. And so with that, it makes it very hard to get, in large quantities because the USDA wants to feed everybody the same. And we know we're not all the same. And so that leads me to the next part of the Farm Bill and 638 contracting, and for us to go ahead and, work through that to be able to, put the food that we want inside the FDIPR program instead of what the USDA determines is good for us. And that can be a little bit later. And then I'll just go into Ziibimijwang. I do chair Ziibimijwang. It's a 300-acre farm that LTBB purchased back in 2014. Again, they went to, a food summit, and they came back minds blown. And they said, this is what we're doing. Granted, there was talks about it with our fisheries and stuff, but they came back and they worked with MSU Extension and some other folks to, purchase a 300-acre farm. And out of that 300-acre farm, 200 of it's wooded and the other 100 is tillable. And so they gave Ziibimijwang the place to work on the tillable land and, to bring food and culture back. Ziibimijwang, I really love telling the story of what it means. Ziibi is river. Mij is like the root word for food, and Wang means place. So the place where the food grows near the river is technically what Ziibimijwang means. And part of us is to use that as well as to reclaim our language. So, when people say, let's go to the farm, I'm kind of like, let's go to Ziibimijwang. Let's go to the place where the food grows near the river instead of the farm, So, I'm always kind of working on that angle and trying to get people to think in that way instead of, the non-traditional way. So, but yeah, that's about it. I can talk forever or not at all. So, but thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. And I hope we have a good conversation.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. That's a great introduction. So without further ado, how about James? Are you ready for your intro, your big debut? Let's do this.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for being here today and for inviting me. And I want to build on some of the things that Joe and Marty have shared. It's been an honor to get to know them over the last year, mostly, I would say. Kind of funny how the pandemic has created opportunities or changed our work in certain ways. That's opened doors as well as created challenges. But so as was said, my name is James DeDecker. I work for Michigan State University at the Upper Peninsula Research and Extension Center, and that's in Chatham, Michigan in the central Upper Peninsula. We've been working there. I should say MSU's been working there since 1899 when the facility opened. So we're just over 120 years old there. And as the sort of non-native perspective on the panel today, I do want to just quickly offer our land acknowledgement that we have for the facility that is really built upon MSU's land acknowledgement, but to give a sense of the history of how we came to be and how that's rooted in the issues that we're going to be discussing today. So our facility, Uprec, occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, our facility resides on land that was ceded in the 1836 Treaty of Washington. And we want to recognize today, as always, the 12 federally recognized tribes, Native nations in Michigan, the historic Indigenous communities here, as well as individuals who live here now, and those that were forcibly removed from their homelands. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm the Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. So while that language is pretty formalized, I think a lot of thought has gone into what words were selected, and we want to make sure that we recognize that as part of the history of the work that we do for MSU here in the Upper Peninsula. And it's interesting that with that beginning, now our work is kind of coming back around to look at how we can develop better relationships with Native communities in Michigan and how we can address some of the issues that our history or all of our shared history has created. So after that land was ceded in 1836, for about the next 60 years or so, Cleveland Cliffs Mining Company owned it. And then a subsidiary of Cleveland Cliffs, the Munising Railroad, also had interest in it. And it was from the Munising Railroad that MSU received that property. And I think it's interesting as we look back to that history, how short really that period of 60 years was that they determined that the logging or mining interests weren't there on the lands that we're occupying in Chatham, and quickly turned it over to the university. And so when we think about the history of land-grant universities and our role in agriculture, or just in community outreach and education and research, that connection to how we got here and where some of our assets, and particularly our land, came from. So I've been at MSU Uprec for just 2 years, but prior to that, I was with MSU Extension for about 8 years down in the northeastern Lower Peninsula in Presque Isle County. And I was a field crop educator there, and now we have a much more diverse program here at Uprec that I'm involved with. Our research and outreach really falls into 4 core areas that we think about. One is pastured beef cattle. We have a herd of about 350 red Angus and cross beef cattle at the farm, and we look at issues with how they're raised and fed, and how that contributes to not only the production system, the animals themselves, and the meat quality and productivity, but also environmental outcomes, consumer preference, and things like that as well. We also do crop and forage agronomy, a lot of variety testing for crops like small grains, forages, alfalfa, grass, etc. Our North Farm facility is actually our older campus on the north side of Chatham, where the farm began in 1899. We moved out of there in 1985 down to what's called our South Farm. But in 2012 to 14, the North Farm was sort of reinvigorated and renovated, and now that's where we do work focused on organic specialty crops. So if you go to the Market Food Co-op, you can purchase North Farm produce there as one example. We also have tried to emphasize research as part of that aspect of our work as well. Things like organic vegetable variety testing, or some of the hemp work that I'm going to talk about later. The fourth area of our research and outreach at Uprec is focused on what we call land-based learning. And that's essentially the piece that focuses on our younger audiences generally, particularly our K through 14 audiences, teachers and students that we involve in ag and natural resource education at the farm, and then also beginning farmer outreach and education that we do there. So that's a little bit of background on Uprec. As far as our work specifically with Indigenous communities, I've been involved personally in agriculture projects with Native communities since about 2014. And that actually started with a relationship building series that MSU Extension put together with some of our educators that focus specifically on Native communities, like Emily Proctor. And the goal was to try to develop some partnerships and seed those with some grant money. And through that, we were able to develop a small project called Planting Lifeways in 2014 with the Sioux Tribe. And we worked with some gardeners there to both understand their experience with gardening, and then try to bring the resources of MSU to bear as well to help them be more successful in their gardens. And so early it was an effort at what I would call like culturally appropriate gardening education at that time. Stepping back, I guess one step before that, where did my personal interests come from? I grew up gardening and always had interest in agriculture that way. But it wasn't really until my undergraduate education in environmental studies and anthropology that I really started to become interested in the way that food is so closely tied to communities and the way that communities interact with their environment through food and through agriculture. And so it was that connection that really got me interested. And although I understand the pretty fraught or challenging reputation that anthropology has in Indian country, and for good reason in a lot of cases, I really had some pretty thoughtful educators at UW Oshkosh, both in environmental studies and in anthropology, that really looked at Indigenous history and culture through a social justice and through an environmental justice lens, and in a really progressive way that helped us, I think, critique the history of that scientific discipline of anthropology, but really seeded my interest in Native communities and history and culture. Our current project, I think, is pretty exciting, and that is a partnership with Bay Mills Community College, Lake Superior State University, Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, and Ziibimijwang Farm, which is how I got to know Joe. And Waishiki Bay Farm out at Bay Mills as well. And that is what we call the Hemp Trim Project. And this is a NIFA supported effort, and the acronym TRIM. It's the Hemp Tribal Research Initiative for Michigan. And our goal with that project is to really understand how cannabis, and hemp specifically, low THC cannabis, if you're not familiar, can play a role in sovereignty and in economic development, both on the food and other products side, because we're looking at hemp as a source of grain, fiber, and of cannabinoids like CBD, and how we might use hemp as a tool to achieve our objectives in Indian country and for Native communities in terms of agriculture and development. So we've had 1 year of that effort. We can talk a lot more about that if you want, but that's a little bit about my background. Just to, again, kind of quickly reflect on what Joe and Marty said earlier, I think the way that they set the stage in terms of thinking about how change in our communities and our food systems is going to take a long time. This is really a generational effort, and we need to focus on how we pass that knowledge on and focus on the education component, particularly with the younger generations. And then, there was a question that was posed earlier, and maybe we'll get into this more about, what have you learned about Indigenous agriculture? Maybe that's interesting or people don't know about. And I think what I reflect on is actually sort of the relational aspect and the historical aspect, and the fact that our food systems and our communities are always evolving. And so in the same way, it's going to take time to sort of repair the wounds in our food systems and our communities that have been formed over time. We need to think about agriculture itself and the plants that we're working with also as a very dynamic and evolving system. I think that oftentimes when we think about reclaiming or preserving Native histories and cultures, or even seeds and plants that are part of that, oftentimes we tend to think of it as a static thing, that if we can recover it from the past and we can hold it close and keep it, then that will help us move forward. But in a lot of ways, I think that it's actually about how we create culture moving forward, and how culture continues to be dynamic and evolve. And the same thing I think is true for our plants and our food, that we need to think about how we create something like the next indigenous corn variety, for example, and the sort of incongruent terms that I'm intentionally using there about it being indigenous, but it also being new and evolving. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to have great discussion today.
All right, thank you so much, James. And I'm just going to take a deep breath because I'm holding my breath in each one of these introductions and thinking, okay, here's all these questions, let's do it. But where do we start? And so I think what James just said is a good segue to kind of take a step back in time just a little bit, because we, many of us on these series calls have heard about the history, we understand some of that, but here's a unique perspective through agriculture. We've learned through previous presentations about, land ownership, and that, for tribal folks, the land, the plants, the animals, everything on it, the earth, the soil, it's all relatives to us. They're all other beings, just because they're not human beings doesn't mean we don't recognize them as big brothers and sisters or grandparents and things like that. And that's some of the process of removal and assimilation that we've all had to experience in our tribal communities. And so the question that I want to offer to the panel is, what else can you tell us about Indigenous agricultural historically? We didn't just clear cut a space, and many of us lived in colder climates where we didn't have a growing season. So how can you dig a little bit deeper into our historical agricultural practices and traditions? And whoever wants.
Yeah, so one of the things that Michelle mentioned earlier is that I had an opportunity to read through all of those treaties. And those treaties, in some ways, represent a snapshot of our history, but they also speak to what we had in place before them and how those treaty relationships reflect the kind of relationships we had after they were written. Across the United States in treaty making with all the tribes, we have, out of the 378 treaties or treaty supplements that were written, we have 253 of those contain food provisions. That's not a mistake. Food is central to the idea of sovereignty, right? And so that's just food mentioned specifically within the treaties. We also have the more larger concepts of land, because obviously it's hard to have a food without land or access to the water. So just within that, it's really important that we think about how those relationships were formed, where they come out of. I was talking with my class the other night, and the idea that we all have this, we were all taught this in the movies and in these not real well thought out history books, that Manhattan Island was traded for a few beads. We've all heard this myth. What people on the face of the earth would ever give away their homeland, where they've spent their entire lives, where their ancestors are buried, for a few beads? It's preposterous. So we know that that's not true. We know that when people approached our ancestors, the more likely scenario was that our ancestors said to them, "You are welcome to be here with us. You're here with us and our relationship with the Mother Earth on this turtle island in this area. And you're welcome to live here as we do. You're welcome to do what you need to do to live a good life, Minobimadas, just like we were." But we also said, but this area over here, that's not for you. That's just for us. And this area over here, that's not for you. That's just for us. And why would we say that? Why wouldn't we just say, hey, come on in and be everywhere that we are? Well, I think it's because we held places sacred. There were certain places that were for ceremony, certain places where our ancestors were buried. Certain places that we knew if we didn't care for them as they had been cared for, which these other people maybe not have the same values of these places, that it would mean the difference between life and death for us and our communities. And I think it kind of flip-flops the idea of treaty making on its head. We didn't say, hey, let's all go live on the reservation, because that's what we really want to do. We don't want to live off the reservation. What we did is we invited people to share a way of life with us on the terms that we had established over thousands of years. And so I think it really depends on how you look at those treaties. There's these things called the Canons of Treaty Construction. They are based on the US Supreme Court's findings and rulings over the years in dealing with treaty issues. One of those is that ambiguities in treaties have to be resolved in favor of the Indians. Indians are considered the underdog in the relationship. So any ambiguity in those treaties has to be resolved in our favor. Now, I wish there's a lot of lawyers and judges who understood that better, because they oftentimes make mistakes as they're thinking about treaty relationships. Another canon is that the meaning of those terms have to be derived from Indian understanding at the time the treaties were written. So where do we find that? And we can't jump in the hot tub time machine and go back to 1817. So where do we get that information? What are those repositories of knowledge about how we as Indigenous people understood those things at that time? Well, one of those things is our oral tradition. In fact, it's the largest repository of knowledge. So how our people today understand what our people meant then actually means a lot. It's the largest repository of knowledge. However, non-native people might say, oh yeah, but you guys are biased. You're biased toward your favorable outcome. Yeah, we are. And so there's other forms of knowledge. There's early written accounts. There's, as James suggested, there's anthropological understandings, the early anthropological, including the physical artifacts. There's linguistic artifacts. Much of our meaning is contained within our languages. And so as we look at, one of my favorite examples of linguistic artifacts is in the treaty petition of 1864 that was carried by Lake Superior Ojibwe to Washington, D.C. and presented to the President of the United States. There's this image on birch bark that was taken, and it has a crane being on with lines connected to these other clan beings and connected to the earth. And in this petition, in the transcript of the treaty negotiation, it has the people from the United States providing a neck medal to the Anishinaabe Ojibwe people. And it's written as Wabekgun, with an N at the end. And so if you're familiar with Anishinaabemowin, you'll understand that that is referring to, on the animacy scale, things that are less animate, or what we would say inanimate. I have problems with animate, inanimate, but less animate. Well, once they place it around the neck and sign the treaty, all of a sudden it becomes Wabekuk. It takes on life. It becomes living neck medals. It's imbibed with spirit energy that takes it up in the level of animacy, because it's vested now with the lives and responsibilities for our people and the world around us. So historically speaking, we think about the relationship in terms that we have to think of it, one, based in our understanding of the good life, Minobimadas, right? But we also have to understand it in a way that, how did I say that? We didn't understand what they didn't understand. We didn't understand what they didn't understand when those treaties were written. So as Anishinaabe people, as Indigenous people, we thought, maybe mistakenly, that they had a similar orientation to Mother Earth that we did. We didn't get that they didn't get it. It was kind of our mistake. we just assumed that they would see that. But now we know, as we look back, that was not the case. So I'm going to stop there and let other folks jump in. But I thought those are some pretty important treaty points.
Yeah. So along those lines, those historical and I think that's very important to know, that kind of sets some understanding of, that we didn't just, we hear a lot of people say, well, why is it that, Native folks get all these things? It's not about what we get, it's about what wasn't taken or what wasn't misunderstood or construed. So thinking about history, other aspects of history, and I'm wondering, Joe or James, and some of the work that you're doing, what are some of the agricultural practices that you're seeing that have value? From Joe, your perspective, I know you do a lot with the hominy making and going back to some of those old practices, the relationships with our traditional foods. And for James, with you, science is catching up with some of our old practices and values. And how are you seeing those things meshing and starting to become more widely known and available? So either one of you, if you want to jump in.
So you kind of broke up during the middle of that, and you were.
Oh, sorry, Joe.
So I was like.
So Joe, so James, we'll come back to your question. So for Joe, I think the question would be, what are some of those traditional practices? You're working with hominy making in an old way and bringing back that nutrient dense portion of corn, the way we should be eating corn instead of how it's given to us now, how we've come accustomed to eating it, or building those plant relationships with people. If you could talk more about that. I mean, because again, some of our old practices weren't just about tilling the land. It was about management of the forestry and encouraging plants and foraging even. So if you could talk about that.
Well, I had this conversation with one of our lawyers the other day, right? And I was like, we're talking about treaty rights and, what was given. And I was like, isn't agriculture like a treaty right? And she said, no. And I was like, okay, weird. She's like, fishing, hunting. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. I mean, I think us providing for ourselves, just because we didn't grow in rows didn't mean we didn't grow. We didn't have agriculture. And that's what I like to tell people, just because you don't see thousands of acres of rows and rows of corn doesn't mean we didn't grow corn, to those levels, and there's those, through those histories and those notebooks of like how much we traded, and like how much maple sugar we traded, or, because it wasn't maple syrup that we traded. It was, since Bakwat, it was the maple sugar itself. Even explaining that to people today is the process of learning, again, what is our traditional foods, and so, we talk about hominy, we talk about scorched corn, here in, our part of the area, scorched corn is the preferred corn for corn soup. And, when I was talking about hominy, they were like, no, Joe, we've never done hominy here. Never, that's not what we did. It was just scorched corn. And I'm like, that's weird, because like, I'm sitting here reading this book, and not to say, books are the end all be all, but like the author of the book is, one of, our area's, oral like history teachers, and in this book, he talks about hominy, and he talks about that's how they would make it. And he talked about this is the kind of corn that they would use. And so when we talk about that, we talk about, Edwagijik and Jane Edwagijik and what she done. She would just come in, when she first came into the area, no one wanted to talk to her and tell her, what we did or, how we did it. So what she would, she made friends with somebody, Veronica, Veronica's parents who are gone, but Veronica's still here. But she would, leave a recording device in there, and people would just come in and talk and tell stories in the language. And, those have been like made into books now that we get to read and, use as a resource. But, in there, it literally talks about we made hominy, and what we called hominy, and like how, what kind of corn, and, where it came from and how corn came to be. So for me, and for what we do with Ziibimijwang, you know, is to bring back the minimum odds of win, as you know, Marty has said, is to bring back the good life. And what is that, right? It's bringing back those foods and those ways that we've done it, because at the end of the day, that's what makes you feel good, is providing for your community and providing for yourself, and you know, the ability to give away. So here recently, I mean, we started doing hominy again, but it's also bringing the tools together and learning what those tools are, and keeping them, you know. And I mean, there's a Butagan workshop going on right now in Bay Mills, you know, and they're talking about it being their original food processor. And I was like, well, that is. And even with that, right, I didn't know what a Butagan was. And so when I learned what it was, I went to our archives and records department, because, you know, they're supposed to be the source of all this stuff. And I was like, you know what a Butagan is? And they're like, nope, no clue. I'm like, well, and I showed them a picture. And then it was Jordan, actually. Now she's our education director. But when she was in archive, she's like, wait a minute. You know, and she runs to the back and she comes out with an actual Butagan. And I was just like, that's amazing. And like, they literally had it in the back and no one kind of knew, you know, where it came from, the provenance of it, or, you know, but they're like, we have one in the back. And I was like, that's amazing. You know, that'd be great to see that and to have our community see it and know that's still here and that we can still use that, just like black ash basket making. You know, all those tools are meant for us to continue our work with. You know, they're just not things that we put up on a shelf. You know, we still use them to this day.
Oh, can you tell us what it is? I'm not, I don't get it.
Oh, Jim, yeah. Oh, great. So a Butagan is a mortar and pestle, right? So the Butagan is made out of a birch log, and it's hollowed out and it's burnt. And then in it, you know, it's got the big pestle, and that's how you would smash the corn and process the corn or the other dips of food to digest. So, you know, it was just really interesting for me to see that, you know, and, you know, here, bringing it back to our community so our community can see that again, you know, is part of the process of, you know, what food sovereignty is and getting them excited. And I know all this kind of builds into the main question that was asked of me in the beginning, you know, where do I see Ziibimijwang in 5 years? So I'll hold out until I actually get asked that question. But did that answer your question, Michelle?
Yes, thank you. That's great. And then I want to turn that similar question over to James, in that, you know, how is science catching up to traditional knowledge and wisdom in these same practices?
Yeah, thank you. I'll follow up on what the other two said, and kind of revisiting my earlier comments about kind of diversity and dynamism. I'll start with a story. We had an opportunity this year, well, last year now, I guess in 2020, to work with College of the Menominee Nation to grow out a flint corn screening. And so we got a bunch of lines of flint corn, about 58 or something, about that many of them, from seed banks, you know, 10 seeds each, and had an opportunity to plant them out and just begin to screen the material and understand what value it might have or what diversity is there. And it was incredibly striking to me for some different reasons. I mean, I have done corn research before, but we're talking, you know, conventional grain and silage hybrids for large commodity farms. And this corn that we grew in 2020 was entirely different than anything I'd ever seen. You know, and not only in things like the color of the kernels that we might associate with that kind of diversity, but in all regards, in terms of its days to maturity, its stature, how many shoots it has, right? I mean, corn should be a single stem with a single ear, right? But no, in fact, many of these corns had 3 stems and multiple ears and so forth. And so the diversity was really striking. And I think when you begin to look at it, you know, this is the process of selection and guided evolution that happened long ago as a lot of native peoples went from a wild grass to what we think of as corn, as more modern corns. And so, you know, what were they up to? What's the difference between what I saw in 2020 and this diverse set of old flint corns versus what corn is today? And I think one important thing is that it's a food focus. And so when we think about our modern food systems versus these traditional food systems or food ways, these were corns that people intended to eat directly. They weren't feeding livestock. They weren't selling a commodity that they wanted to be transportable or shelf stable or consistent, right? It was about feeding people. And I think that's one of the coolest things about these early food systems and indigenous food systems, is that they had that food focus. The other thing is adaptability. I think my experience, I grew up in Wisconsin. I've always lived in the upper Midwest. We always thought about, or often talked about, indigenous communities in this part of the country as being more hunter-gatherers and being farmers, right? But we're learning more and more that that was not the case. And actually, their agricultural systems were quite diverse and incredibly adapted to some of the challenges that we face today. Another question that was posed earlier in an email was, what's different about agriculture in the Upper Peninsula? Well, it's hard, right? Agriculture in northern Michigan, northern climates is very challenging. We have a number of related environmental challenges, mostly a short, cool growing season that we face. These flint corns, as I began to do my research, are named after places and peoples from whence they came, right? And so you can begin, just by the names of some of these varieties, begin to trace their history. And what you find is that a number of these corns were developed, were selected and bred in places where we don't grow corn anymore, and very northern environments. And I think it was so amazing for me to think about corn that can grow in Winnipeg, Canada, right? And not only what's been lost for indigenous communities in this as a resource for feeding themselves and for sovereignty and et cetera, but what's been lost for humanity in the process of selecting for a narrow set of parameters that are focused on a capitalistic industrialized food system. And we have given up so many things, right? And a lot of that are things that not only important for feeding people, but important for the future of humanity, the future of agriculture, and how we produce our food. So that, I think, is really important. Aside from that kind of diversity and adaptability that comes with it, I think the relational model that has been talked about today is a really important aspect of this, that there in these traditional food systems were not lines drawn between human and non-human, cultivated and uncultivated plants in the same way, and that foodways were really lifeways, right? And so when Marty was talking earlier about the health metrics that they'd seen changes on in the Decolonizing Diet project, that's all great, right? And I think those are so important for addressing those health disparities in Native communities. But you know what I think is probably even cooler? What's cooler to me is the relationships that must have developed between people and their non-human relations in the process of learning to source and process and eat traditional foods. So that relational aspect, I think, is so important. And it excites me too, from an agricultural perspective, thinking about underappreciated plants. I have a lot of background in weeds and a lot of interest in weeds. And my favorite plant is Amaranth, because Amaranth is both a weed, and, it's in modern agricultural systems, many Amaranth species are treated and managed as weeds. But as many of you know, I guess from your reactions, is that it's an incredibly diverse and wonderful food plant as well, right? You can eat the greens, you can eat the seeds, and the diversity is just incredible. So I love breeding and sharing and planting amaranth. And what I love to do in the garden, if you're interested, you can do this yourself. Get some cultivated amaranth, sow that in your garden, and then selectively keep amaranthus weeds in your garden. And this is what I do every year, and allow them to cross. And what you do is you begin to see this interaction of what was sort of the forgotten plants, right? The weeds that everybody's going to pull out of their garden, and the selections, the sort of guided evolution that we've made in that plant for ornamentals and for food uses over time. And you'll begin to see these amazing things, these amazing new cultivars develop just by natural crossing in your garden as you save seed year to year. And I think it tells a story about relationships. And I think it tells a story about the diversity and the dynamism of agriculture, both native food systems and agriculture today, and how we need to focus on continuing that process of cultivating the crops and the food systems and the relationships that we want to see, that while we bring with us the best things from the past and we reclaim those things that have been taken, that we don't get stuck, right? That we don't get stuck in the past, that we use the best of the past to guide us to the future that we want to see. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for that. So that kind of bridges us into another question that just came up, thinking about traditional food storage and how people manage their food source. I know I just came across an article, or maybe that was something, I'm trying to think who it was, if it was no, it was Hawaiians. I just came across an article about Hawaiians, how they've kind of revitalized their traditional refrigeration, how they used to. And if you think about where Hawaii is, you're thinking, refrigeration before electricity, you got to be crazy. But they're revitalizing that, and it's really helping with their economics and their growing seasons and going back to a traditional diet. So let's turn that back over. Marty, I know with the decolonizing diet, there was a period where early on where, it was really difficult to find enough diversity in the different kinds of plants that you needed to be healthy. And you knew that they were there, but finding them difficult. So can you talk a little bit more about that? And then also, in finding those foods or acknowledging those foods, also were there storage practices, or how did you manage eating off the land like that?
Yeah, so I like to tell people that the spectrum of the American diet, and I'm limited to this square here, but you can see what I'm saying, is this wide, and I'd like to spread my arms way out, but anyway. The American diet is this. If you think about what we did on the Decolonizing Diet Project, it was like that. But it was that deep. And so I think that's a really important thing to think about, is diversity of food is both horizontal and vertical. And it's really how you appreciate, how you interact with it. And the imagination, right? How does our imagination take us into food relationships that are respectful, flavorful, that really speak to being in balance and harmony with nature. Now, that being said, we researched for a year and a half. We put some time and energy into trying to figure out what were the foods that our ancestors in this area, the Great Lakes region, what did they really have access to on a daily basis? Whether that was through hunting, fishing, gardening, gathering, and trading. And so we oftentimes forget that trading was part of who we were. Joe is Odawa. There's a reason why the Odawa are known as the people who trade. It's part of our identity. And so, when we think about the the access we have to foods, we know that prior to 1600s, we had well over 500 food types that we were eating, and the combinations thereof, they really made for a good deal of variety. I was having this conversation with my class the other day about, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the book Half Earth. It's a proposal that human beings set aside half of the earth for nature and that we leave it alone. It's a way to save our planet from us. And I likened that to the idea of the way the Anishinaabe people, how we approach it. So I thought about Robin Wall Kimmerer's, the honorable harvest, the guidelines, the protocols that she lays out in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And I thought about what I've learned based on our own oral tradition in our communities about how whatever we gathered or grew or hunted and fished during the good, plentiful food time of the year between spring and fall, how we would try to do that in an honorable way. But then even that portion that we took for ourselves, the humankind, we set aside about half of what we could dry and store to get us through winter, because we knew times were going to be tough. So if you imagine the planning and the care that went into those food relations, right from the springtime when we're first tapping those trees to knowing the seeds that we're going to be planting. Glad to see Shiloh's here today. Shiloh's one of those folks that are really going to be helping our communities with our futures with the seeds and understanding our relationship with seeds and rematriation. But, of the thought and care that goes into planning an entire year of food for not just yourself, but for your community, which includes the other plants and animals that also rely on those same resources, that really matters. And so our folks, they must have really had it down to a science, a TEK versus an SEK in some ways, but, they had it down. And so the storage of food, like when we were on the Decolonizing Diet Project, we had to transform space, space on our cupboards, space in our refrigerators, our freezers, whatever. We stored all kinds of food everywhere we could. And that was a real learning curve, a steep learning curve for us. And, as we were doing that, trying to figure out, because we also had to accommodate our daughters who were not on the Decolonizing Diet Project with us. They were being forced to eat sometimes the food we ate because that's all we'd cook. But we also had to accommodate for their food. So we had these two food systems going on in our house at the same time. And everywhere you looked, there was food hanging from the rafters. There was food stuck in this corner and that corner. I mean, the refrigerator, the freezers, everything was full of food. It was a great year. I mean, there was food everywhere. But it really kind of woke me up to the idea about, how did our ancestors living in wigwams, how did they store all that food that they needed, in a traditional way? And so now, if you look at it, and I'm sure other folks in this seminar today have thought about that, those food caches, birch bark itself, the methods that we had, some of the antibacterial properties that birch has, some of the preservative properties, buried in the ground or stored in trees, or, meat dried on racks in the sunshine. I mean, there were some really cool things going on. Salting was part of what we did. So some of you might know that down just south of Mount Pleasant, there's a place called Shepherd, Michigan. Well, Shepherd, Michigan has not always been known as Shepherd, Michigan. It was also known as Salt Springs. And so there's a reason why it was called Salt Springs, and that's because there's a salt brine that would bubble up through the ground in that area. Yeah, saline. So Shiloh just posted there, saline, another salt site. So our people have been using salt brine for preserving food and for cooking. And, these near surface salt deposits have been part of our diet. So like when Joe was talking earlier about taking salt out of the diet, we also put salt into our diet in a traditional sense, whether that was trading or finding it ourselves. And so there was a number of ways that we preserved our food. And I think when we preserve our foods in that way, it connects us to our ancestors. It also makes us aware of how would we do that in a contemporary context. How would we use these things, as James has said, to help us into our futures? My daughter, Dobby, who just completed her master's in sustainable construction, she and I had this conversation about alternative energy. And she said, Dad, how do you think our Anishinaabe people would have created a windmill? And I was like, wow, what a question, right? And very proud dad moment for me, but very challenging moment too, because I'd have to think, well, how would we have approached that? What would a birch bark windmill have looked like? How would it have operated in our communities? And who knows, maybe it wouldn't have been a birch bark, maybe it'd have been a whatever, copper or birch or quartzite or who knows? And how would it have produced energy?
for us? Would we have had that thing? Now, the reality is that we'll never know because the cultural carpet was pulled out from under us by colonization. And so as we think about these things now, the decolonizing process, we have to go back and think, here's what our ancestors gave us. How would we now use what they gave us to approach these things differently if we give ourselves that opportunity? And I think that's why decolonizing methodologies are so important for us to think through. It honors our ancestors. It provides us with the opportunity to be restorative and to heal ourselves. And it also provides us with possible futures that are in line with our values as Indigenous people. And now I'm going to get all preachy, so I'm going to get all quiet and let someone else take over.
Marty, I think that's a very powerful statement. And I think that leads into the next question for Joe. So what are some of the major milestones for the Ziibimijwang farm over the next 5 years? And then what do you see as opportunities for connecting schools and early childhood centers, other tribal farms and things like that to be able to tap into business and kind of expand?
Well, so first I went out to my truck and grabbed my butagan. So here's the pestle. And I think Jen posted a good picture on there, but like, so I don't, you can see this, just a nice burnt out, hollow log that we would put, manoomin in, dried corn, fish, and pound it to add, to our cornmeal. Yeah, this one's in my truck. You never know when you need it, right? It's easier carrying around in your Gmod, but where do I see, Ziibimijwang? In 5 years, I'd love to see, all the households have a butagan, right? And to understand, this is how they could process their food. We talk about the, how did we store the food in the past? I mean, behind me right now is 49 braids of mandamin. And on each one of those braids is 49 ears of corn, right? It totaled out dried weight. I think it came out to be like almost 500 pounds of corn right there. It's gone already, right? Just imagine what it would be like, just looking at that a little bit compared to what we would need to like survive through the winter time to make it to spring, So that was a lot for us here. And this is, just 500 pounds, really. But for Ziibimijwang, for us to see in the 5 years, there's a lot of work that we're still doing, and it's really growing our infrastructure to go out and, teach, our community more about, what has been lost, and to, still connect with them and, to bring that stuff back and, kind of answer those questions of like, what would a birch bark windmill look like? Because do I necessarily know how, I read somewhere the other day that, they pounded fish and added it to their cornmeal. I'm like, pounded fish? Okay, I got to do it this weekend. I got to go smoke some fish. I got to go try it, and then they said they dried it out. Like, well I guess I'll go learn how to dry it out, right? But, that's what I want all of us to do as well, is to relearn and connect with those foods that we didn't necessarily know how to eat, but I kind of get lost in this stuff too. Ziibimijwang, we are continually, learning, to bring these foods. Our charter says that we have to not only be self-sufficient. So, that's why we are in farmers markets and we're doing not conventional farming, but more market vegetable farming, so we can, produce, for ourselves. And again, the same thing here. I bring manoomin in and some people don't even know what manoomin is, so they're afraid to eat it or they don't know how to cook it, so we have to really slowly introduce that to them again, just like the hominy and the corn, the traditional corn. Just like Shiloh said, there's different corns, different ways to preserve, different ways to, cook them. And so we have to reintroduce and teach that again, to a lot of these families in our community. We would really love to see more tribal farmers, within our region up here, and I think right now we have one besides Ziibimijwang just here in northern Michigan, right? And it's good to see them, try and start, and we want to be a resource for them to come in and learn from us and get seeds and have a seed bank and all this other stuff. But we also want to be able to touch to the youth. We bring youth in to work with us as well, so they can learn. Our farm manager Kafui, he's from Ghana, and he's got a degree in agriculture from Ghana. He's come here and he's worked. But part of the thing is we were talking about butagans. He's like, we had butagans, we didn't call them butagans, but we had corn mortars like this back home. So he got the opportunity to share with us, how they do it back home. And it's not very different, really, And so for him to work with us is very, enlightening, because he gets to learn from us, we learn from him, and we all share the same goals, and we talk about tribes and, different tribes, and he gets it. He's like, oh, well, yeah, there's a different dialect in the language over here. And so, but sometimes, some of our past farm managers didn't get that, so KK has been, a very instrumental part to it. We've hired Rosebud, sorry, Shiloh, a way to come up here and work as well and be a very productive contributor to Ziibimijwang. And it's been awesome because, Rosebud brings with her a lot of knowledge with her as well, to get out and reach with those kids. She's a mother, she knows how to do those things, and we want to go to the schools and work with the schools because her kids go to these schools, and so when we go to the school, it makes the other tribal students there feel good to see their tribe being there with the fresh fruit, instead of some other place. When they do a field trip, they're coming out to Ziibimijwang to do a field trip, and I know those kids are feeling good because they're like, yes, we're not different, and so we've worked with Jen, we've worked with Casey to go do teachings at schools about the Three Sisters, and really connect with the students that way, and to reintroduce foods as a whole to those kids on that level as well. But I don't know, I probably strayed a little bit there, Michelle, but that's, my brain just goes wonky sometimes when I think about all the food stuff.
No, that's okay. That's great. I have a couple, and I hope you're all following the chat too, because there's some great side conversation and enrichment to add to the conversation as people are talking and making reference. I do have a couple of really big questions. We're running close on time, but I also want to give just a couple of minutes to Shiloh. I invited Shiloh and another colleague, Patrice Brown, to join us today. We all kind of work together on different projects. And I was telling them about Joe and Marty and James talking, and they got excited and said, oh my gosh, I want to hear that. So, but I just want to give Shiloh a couple of minutes to just add to the conversation, on some other, I saw some of the sidebar conversation had a lot to do with seed saving and stuff. If you wouldn't mind just taking a minute or two to introduce yourself and add a couple of notes to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm kind of hijacking things a little bit, but I'm really happy. And as I said in the chat, these topics are really stimulating for me. Any of you that know me, and I know some of you in other realms, I'm always talking about food and these things. So, but as Michelle said, my name is Shiloh Maples. I'm Ojibwe and Odawa, and I live here in Southeast Michigan right now. And I work with a national organization called Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, which gives a lot of different levels of technical support to individuals, families, communities, Indigenous communities that are engaging in food sovereignty work. And I specifically work in the Indigenous Seed Keepers program. So that's a national network of seed keepers. But I am the first of the regional coordinators. We're hoping to, in the next couple of years, identify coordinators in the other regions. But my role is really to offer technical support to the upper Midwest in really any area, if it's organizing their community, if it's planning process, technical ag questions. That's kind of my role, is to offer that support. But some of the main things I wanted to share that we're working on, or I'm kind of supporting this year within our regional network, is a seed sovereignty assessment toolkit that we're rolling out right now, that Rowan White developed, to help our network members get a better sense of what is the state of seed in their communities. How does seed move around? And this information will help inform how seed secure or seed resilient are our communities and our region. And then we'll be able to use that information to do our individual strategic plans for whatever initiatives people are engaging in at the local level, but also give us this regional perspective as well. And so that's one big thing we're doing. That's also kind of feeding into the second thing I wanted to mention, which is we're in the process of forming a regional Indigenous seed cooperative. Not for the sale of seed, but again, to support the security and resilience of our seed systems, to support our communities in being more seed and food sovereign, because seed sovereignty is vital to food sovereignty. So those are some of like the big things that I'm focusing and we're focusing on this year, and I guess that I'm helping to support. We're also, a part of this is going to be establishing a seed inventory or database for our network, so that we can better know what variety, the state of specific varieties, and maybe coordinate some cooperative efforts to save varieties that maybe are in danger of not surviving just because there's such small quantity left. So some things like that, but we, NAFSA as an organization, we really think of, we're promoting this messaging and that we support people from seed to table. And I think even beyond that, because we know that's not, the food system doesn't just end there. It's like this ongoing web that's connected. And so, we have other programs like our culinary food program that is really some of that piece that Joe was talking about and Marty talking about too, like thinking about how we can build individual and household capacity so that people can integrate the skills and knowledge into their everyday lives. Because that's really necessary for us to sustain these things long term and for that intergenerational transmission of knowledge. I just said a lot. I'm going to step back now, but thank you for a moment to give my little spiel, and I would love to connect with you all at a later point.
Yeah, thank you, Shiloh, miigwech. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I have one important question that I would like to have the panel go around and kind of answer. And, and the question is, what do you wish white-led organizations, or what would you like to see leadership, even our governmental leadership, know about collaboration with Indigenous communities? And if you want to take it farther and just say to know about Indigenous agriculture too, we can tie all that in together, or food security. So what do you wish white-led organizations knew, or our government organizations knew, about collaborating with Indigenous communities and or our agriculture and food security? It's a big question, I know.
Well, it is a very big question that we got to sit there and think on, right? I mean, like some people are saying it's like, ooh, land back, right? Real quick, hashtag land back. But, I work, I go to DC. Well, I did go to DC quite frequently before the pandemic, to work on the farm bill. And, we have tribal consultation coming up here next week. So I've been busy, working on that and preparing for that to have tribal consultation. And our 2018 farm bill was the largest. I think we had 8 provisions in the Farm Bill for native agriculture this year, right? And that was to let them know that we're still here and we're still, you know, a very big economic engine for, you know, agriculture on a smaller level. We don't have to do, you know, big, huge monocultures, you know, but, you know, we're here and, you know, we have the ability to feed ourselves, right? And, you know, one of the things I always say, you can't call yourself sovereign unless you feed yourself, right? So we do have that ability and we're learning it. But when it really comes to like what organization, I'm gonna just leave off on that one real quick, and I'll probably come back to it. But I got to formulate that one just a little bit better as well. So I'll hand it off to somebody else here real quick.
Okay, yeah, James or Marty, do you want to add something?
I guess I would say, based on my experience working with universities and academia, is just the importance of adapting the way that we approach our work in research and in education when we're working with Native communities. And, you know, really, if we're doing things right, I think this would apply to our work with any communities, but because of the special history and the tenuous relationship between Native communities and academia in the United States and the land grant system in particular, it's especially important. So, you know, I think that really first needs to be a focus on relationships and listening, right? I mean, that has to be the foundation. It always, you know, I always tell people that relationships is the currency of extension. The problem is that we have a damaged relationship, right? So we can't come to these relationships assuming sort of a blank slate. Definitely not that, right? Or maybe even worse, assuming some of the things that we assume about our majority audiences of white farmers, for example. So we have to learn that history, and we have to invest in those relationships and understand differences in, you know, value systems, worldview, whatever it is, as a foundation. And that's difficult for the university to do, because I think, you know, as scientists, we assume that we have the answers, but that's based on the assumption that, you know, science is the way to view the world and to understand the world and to interact with the world. So I think that we're beginning to learn these lessons. For example, in the focus on non-scientific ways of knowing, like Marty talked about, right, on experiential knowledge for farmers, or participatory research with farmers, or specifically with Indigenous audiences that focus on traditional ecological knowledge. And the way that, rather than being a sort of opposite way of knowing or understanding the world and interacting with agriculture, it's actually a very important complementary source of data, if you will, that we can use to drive our science and to drive our food systems in a direction that is, you know, not only productive but also ethical. So, yeah, I think it's about that, you know, that we really have to be very thoughtful about adapting our approach in working with Native communities, and it's not easy. I'll tell you what, you know, I think there was a similar thing about, you know, what's the most difficult, and building that trust, and addressing some of the historical trauma and the, you know, trauma that has happened today and continues to happen today in some Native communities, and realizing that we're not starting at zero. That's what I think has been the most important thing for me to learn.
Yep, I think that's great, succinct. Marty, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, just a couple of real quick comments. You know, I think it's really important to be there to be a good ally, you know, for non-native people working with native people. Don't come to us as missionaries. Don't have the savior complex, but also realize that there are a lot of native people who have had the culture pulled out from under their communities, their families, who may just be trying to restore those linkages with our traditional knowledge, with our identities. And, you know, that's really important. Don't expect everybody who, just because they're native, to have all this native knowledge. You know, we're trying. We're also very protective of it once we get it back. And so don't feel bad. You know, there are some natives who are real, you know, upset about learning about history and, give us a little space for being angry about history. Some of us are working through that anger right now. It's not necessarily aimed at you personally. And then I guess lastly, just going back to the kind of the theme that runs through all of this stuff, it's all about relations. The more we can foster balance and harmony in our relations, the better off we're all going to be. The Decolonizing Diet Project had Native and non-Native people on it. When we got hungry, the Native people ate the non-Native people. And I'm just kidding. But, but we were there together, and the future will be together. I like to draw on Paulo Freire's perspectives on, addressing oppression. You cannot heal from oppression as the oppressor or the oppressed. You have to do it together. And so it's a journey that we all have to take together. And that doesn't mean that we're going to let people walk all over us again. But it's certainly something that we're going to say, hey, you guys want to truly heal from this? Well, then let's address those wrongs that were done and right them and move forward in the best way possible. So, miigwech.
Nahau, miigwech. So we are at 1:30. I do want to give Joe a chance in case he had another thought that he wanted to add. And I apologize. Again, these conversations are so rich and so nourishing. We always run out of time for questions at the end. So if you do have questions, you can forward them to myself or Jim and Christina. We can forward them on to Joe, James, and Marty, unless Marty and Joe, I know James put his email in the chat. Marty and Joe, if you'd rather they contact you directly, if you put that in the chat, then they'll have that. So I apologize for running out of time, but Joe, any last words that you want to add to that? I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I think it's funny. Like when you get a bunch of us in a group, we just want to talk, right? It's like a big talking circle, and we can go for hours at this, right? So sometimes limit us to a little bit, the U.S. government does that to us. So this is only going to be an hour. And I'm like, well, it's going to take us more than an hour to do this, but but with that, I just want to say thank you all for being here today and listening, and having open ears and open, eyes and open hearts with what you received these words today. So thank you. I appreciate all your perspectives, and I want to say, keep up the good work that you're doing as well. Together we can be better. So miigwech.
Yeah, miigwech. Any final words from my co-hosts, Christina or Jim Lively, before we go? I do have to acknowledge and say thank you so much, James and Marty and Joe, for your wisdom. They're still here. We're still going to continue doing this work. I mean, I know an hour and a half is no time at all when we start getting into the meat of it. And but I think knowing that we're out here having this introduction, I think hopefully all of you will feel comfortable that who to reach out to, and we can all be connected and continue to work together. But with that, Christina and Jim, did you have any parting words before we sign off?
Yeah, I'll say thank you to all of our presenters and panelists on behalf of Groundwork. Thank you to our partners who joined us today. Jim mentioned this in the chat, but our next Lunch and Learn is on March 25th, which is a Thursday from noon to 1. Jim, do you want to give a quick commercial for the topic of that session? You're on mute, or we can't hear you anyways. Oh, we still can't hear you, Jim. Well, I'll call out what you wrote in the chat. It'll be about Anishinaabe harvesting principles applied to how we think about clean energy. So Jim and Michelle have been working with some partners from Michigan Tech and MSU who will lead this conversation. We will pass along more information when we get it. So thanks again to everybody who's here. Just want to shout out the Michigan Humanities Council who has helped fund this Lunch and Learn series. So we hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you on March 25th. Take care, everybody.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Come up.